And to continue our discussion about climate change, I'm joined live from the Masai Mara in Kenya by Dr. Bharat Pankania, who's senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter and is based in Bath in England. Bharat, thank you so much for joining us again here today on ANews. Last week you gave us an excellent explanation, which I encourage our viewers to find and watch, about the effects of climate change and how this doesn't just refer to how the world is warming and the extreme high temperatures we've seen, but also is giving us cold weather and wet weather like we've seen in England this summer and elsewhere, and also killing off the fish in the sea. And you were warning us about the potential threats of infectious diseases spreading to countries like Northern Europe. Now, all of these things are very important, but are people beginning to realise what's happening? Is this changing the language of how we discuss climate change?
Well, I would assume that the vast majority of the population and politicians around the globe are beginning to finally accept that global warming climate change is man-made as a result of industrialization. In the last 150 years or so, we have poured out a lot of the carbon dioxide that was locked up in fossil fuels. However, the key important problem is this, which is leaders of very important countries are reluctant to come forward and say, yes, we have a problem. I'm referring to former President Trump, President Bolsonaro in Brazil, and we've got Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the United Kingdom, who is not very keen on environmental issues, and he does ceremonial, symbolic interventions rather than taking this action seriously.
So, obviously, I want to talk about the politicians in just a moment, but is the general conversation changing? I noticed last week some new signs for the hard of hearing. The British Sign Language have just introduced some new, I don't know what, some new movements to help them to say words like greenhouse gas without having to spell it out by letter by letter. They've actually introduced some new symbols, if you like, into the signing language. Is this going to help us to persuade the politicians that they need to change how they're looking, because we're talking about it in a more direct and productive way?
Well, it's really good news that people with hearing difficulties are also being assisted with new signs, new symbols for climate change subjects like global warming, carbon sequestration, climate change, global warming, carbon sequestration, and all greenhouse gases. However, Andy, here's some other important, interesting developments too. I think it was in Latin America where a group of deaf children were grouped together, and scientists found that they were developing their own sign language themselves. Right. So that's also an interesting domain, which is people with hearing difficulties left to themselves will also develop their own unique sign language.
And I imagine that, I mean, this is a very specific use of language, but in the general populace as well, the fact that we're talking about climate change now here on ANews and other channels, other media outlets are trying to get more factual information out. The man on the street, what is it, the man on the, is it number 72 bus or whatever the phrase is beginning to open their eyes and realise that they need to bring this out more into the public domain and have more honest conversations about what is happening.
Oh, absolutely, Andy. And, you know, what we need to do also as communicators is not overly complicate terminology and expressions. we've got to say it as it is. And that's the way to get your message across.
And this is one of the problems, isn't it? The phrase gaslighting was used last week in an article about the British Prime Minister, and here this is almost a literal use of it because he was wanting to bring more gas, open more licences. When we were talking last week, you inadvertently, I know because we discussed it later, quoted Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. When you said, and I'll quote you first, you said the decent and moral thing for politicians to do is to honestly say that we cannot continue burning fossil fuels. Now, last year, UN Secretary General Guterres said the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels, and that this has to change. So what is the reality here, Bharat?
Well, the reality is that unfortunately, we have politicians who want to be re-elected, and they will do everything possible to deny that fossil fuels are responsible for what will happen to our grandchildren and children after. And remember, Dandy, one thing, once we reach tipping point, it is too late. Unfortunately, we just do not have strong enough collective of politicians to say we must tackle this together. We need a UN, WHO type body to bring these politicians together and hold them to account. The trouble is they promise everything like they did when they have these global warming conferences, COP26, COP so on, but then they go back on their word. That is the problem with politicians all over the world: China, India, Indonesia, Europe, United Kingdom, United States.
Now, the arguments that Rishi Sunak has brought about for issuing new licences, that we're not going to, that the UK isn't going to be transporting this gas because it's going to be taken from offshore and used onshore. But this, in a sense, is, as you say, it's not directly explaining the truth of the issue, because that gas is also going to be exported.
Indeed. So the United Kingdom drills for oil and gas and then sells it on the open market. And we buy our oil and gas on the open market. So there is no such thing as we drill it in the UK waters, extract it in the UK waters, and then sell it and use it in UK waters. It doesn't work like that. And one more thing, Andy, this is really important. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said that in lieu of extracting gas and oil from the North Sea, we are investing in carbon sequestration, because carbon sequestration is a quid pro quo for burning oil and gas. This is absolute nonsense. Carbon sequestration is experimental. It doesn't work. So it is absolute nonsense to say we're drilling for oil and gas, and therefore to make up for it, we're going to do carbon sequestration. The best carbon sequestration that we know of is to plant trees. Unfortunately, those trees should have been planted 30 years ago.
So carbon sequestration, is this an alternative term for the phrase carbon capture that we've been hearing about?
Yes, yes, yes. It is experimental technology which has not been proven to work. It is technology that they're trying to develop, which is extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then make it into insoluble compounds or store it in deep undersea wells, former oil wells, or deep underground bunkers. It doesn't work. It hasn't been shown to work.
So, this is some sort of academic way to try and make us believe that that there is an alternative solution. We can continue using fossil fuels. But is it really the case that that it's the end of the line for fossil fuels? Surely we've been using it for burning gas, burning oil for so long, creating plastics. Surely, if we try and balance things, then everything will be okay, won't it?
Well, the trouble, Andy, is that what was stored in fossil fuels over many billions, not millions, billions of years, is suddenly being released en masse all over the world over the last 150 years only. And therefore, if we carry on like this, once we reach tipping point, and what I mean by tipping point is a chain reaction, whereby the heat generates more heat, which generates more heat, which generates more heat. Once you have reached that tipping point, there is a no point of return. Therefore, we've got to do all we can to reduce the use of those fossil fuels and use renewables. So on the subject of renewables, the United Kingdom government doesn't want onshore wind farms. How ridiculous is this? Because to have wind shows offshore, meaning in the sea, it is much, much more expensive. Whereas whilst planet Earth is burning, you guys, you politicians, do not want to have wind farms on the land which could generate electricity and therefore reduce the burning of natural gas and coal and petroleum.
So renewable energy is something which takes many different forms, from the hydroelectric power stations to wind farms to solar, and there are many other geothermals and so on and so forth. These, I imagine, are solutions that need to be, the best solution needs to be found locally. How can that happen? We can understand that some landowners would object to having turbines on their properties, but what needs to be done? What do people need to do to push this forward?
So from the people point of view is we do all we can and reduce our carbon footprint. That's another expression that not everyone understands. So you can have solar panels on your roof. You can build better houses. You build better houses with better insulation. And again, I'm sorry, I keep on harping back to this issue in the United Kingdom. So we had specifications, higher specifications for building houses with higher insulation. And then the building lobby lobbied this current government, and they removed that obligation to build houses with better insulation. The other thing is build houses which are more southerly facing so that they capture more of the sun with solar panels on their roof, which are south facing. So one, reduce your carbon footprint, do less, travel with public transport, travel with bicycles, shop locally, do those things locally, plant trees, have solar panels, and have better insulated houses. And those measures by individuals can considerably reduce our carbon footprint. The rest is up to governments to also do the same with reorganizing how their technologies work, which is, you may have to consider, and I was not a big fan of nuclear, but I think under the circumstances, nuclear energy is also an option.
And of course, there are issues surrounding that, but as you say, it's about offsetting the realities and finding the right balances in life. So does this also suggest, you talk about some of the things you're talking about there, public transportation, local building codes, and so on. Does this also suggest then that people should not just leave things to national government, but they should get involved in local politics and local government?
Oh, absolutely. And I find from my own experience, Andy, is inertia and lack of faith in elected people, whereby they say, what's it worth? Nothing will change. And I think all people ought to get involved and hold centrally elected ministers, members of parliament and their equivalents to account and boot them out at the next election if they have not delivered.
So, so this is very obviously an ongoing process, a conversation that needs to continue, and pressures need to be put on. We're talking a lot about the United Kingdom because that's where you're normally based. But for example, at the moment you're in Kenya. What sort of differences have you seen about how the discussion is continuing in the United Kingdom against some African countries?
So I'm very pleased to say to you, Andy, that whilst I have been traveling around in Kenya, which is also my home, they are using all manner of technologies, solar, hydro, and geothermal. And I was traveling around the Rift Valley, and I saw many, in fact, only literally a few miles from where I'm sitting now, geothermal plants. So Kenya, which is not an affluent country, is doing its best with, for example, using all available technologies. And they're investing heavily, for example, where they can, in geothermal energy generation.
So this is something that needs to be tackled across the whole globe, and in certain countries like South America, where we're seeing the Amazon being cut back, hopefully the policies there will be changing to try and reduce the destruction of the rainforests. But is this also a question of we see many more cities, many more urban areas being developed? Is this also a question of how we design our living spaces and how we design our cities and so on?
Well, yes. So with respect to planning, we've got to do more cooling of cities. So you need like water fountains, but large water fountains, large bodies of water wherever you have houses, so that the water acts as a natural coolant. And we also need shade-producing trees. So shade-producing trees plus the presence of water are very good examples of requiring very little energy to create cooling in people's homes.
I need to just come back once again to how we initially connected with you as in your role as a medical doctor, and I know that you have a great experience in public health development. How critical is this climate change to public health, and should it be being looked at as a potential public health disaster? And does that mean that this actually gives us more power to instigate change?
Yes, it is a public health emergency without a doubt. And public health is everyone's business. So it will affect our health, our wealth, our well-being, our fauna, our ecology, our everything. And the final bit is, remember, if you reach tipping point, there is a point of no return, and we don't know where that leads us. So, of course, it is an emergency. It is an emergency that we now are aware of. So it's a bit like this, Andy. If I know that a virus is in circulation, which will soon arrive in Turkey, United Kingdom, you would do something about it. Mm-hmm. Similarly here, we've got global warming, and we've got politicians who are dragging their feet, whereas we have reached a critical point. It is an emergency. All the evidence is there. We've got storms, we've got dry periods, we've got wet periods, we've got warming, we've got the warmest July recorded in history. All the signs are there. You've got to act on the signs.
But sadly, as we saw in the COVID pandemic, and I want to thank you again for the tremendous advice that you were able to give everybody during that period. As we saw then, unfortunately, politicians aren't always looking for the best solutions to end the crisis. What would your message to them be?
It is your moral duty to do the right thing. It is your moral duty not to be populist. Planet Earth is in danger. We are looking at you to do the right, honest thing. You know, you mustn't do things that keep you in office just for the sake of keeping you in office.
Because ultimately, just by staying in office, it is just going to, and not trying to instigate change, it is going to fail to bring an end, or not to bring an end. That's maybe too final. To bring an opportunity to move forward and continue life on Earth.
Oh, absolutely. Because you know what people don't want to know and don't want to address is it could bring an end to life on planet Earth as we know it. And therefore, it is imperative that our elected officers do the right thing for the wealth and health of not their country, but planet Earth. That is the only place in the universe that we know of that has got life.
Well, we're very excited that yet another lunar module has gone to the moon to try and find water there. But of course, life is here with us on Earth. I don't want to leave us with a sense of doom and gloom and that the end of the world is nigh. The reality is that we haven't yet reached a tipping point, or the tipping point, as you described it. Can you leave us with a message of hope, with how you can see the way forward from here in a realistic way to help the world get back in balance as best as it can and to move forward in a healthy way?
Look, Andy, it's amazing that you asked me this question, because here I am on my travels in Kenya, and I saw what nature can do. Nature has tremendous ability to regenerate, provided we give it a chance. So, for example, a very, very large farm here, not far away from Mount Kenya, where I am, was the owners decided to convert it to let it be. Let it run wild. So I went around that farm, and it was amazing to see that in the space of 30 years, wilderness and life and variety of plants and lives and animals and insects and everything have returned to live there. So nature has a tremendous capacity for regeneration. We should use nature to rebuild planet Earth. We can do it. The sooner we act, the cheaper it is, the better it is.
And how would this then apply, do you think, to a country like the UK? I mean, obviously, it's a very different model of existence. Could something like that, if productive things can happen in what are described as second or third world countries, what about in what has been described as a first world country? What possibilities are there?
There are endless possibilities. So one is the use of technology, and we should use that technology and help other countries with the technological findings. So, you know, we have better solar panels, better use of energy generation, using renewables as energy generation, and then share that technology with the rest of the world free of charge. And if we were to do that, we will be in a much better position. So it's not a case of we invented this, we're keeping it to ourselves. We invent it because we're rich. We are the ones who burnt a lot of fuel to become rich and powerful. So one of our gifts to other nations of the world would be, we are technologically advanced. We are going to give our technology to you to use to make the whole of planet Earth a better place, a stable place for generations more to live here.
And this, I think, really is the message, not just of our topic of conversation today, the climate change. It's also the message of all health issues that, as we saw in the pandemic, where people try and keep things to themselves, there remains an imbalance and there's no solution. But when people share their technologies, share their expertise and their wealth, then there are advantages for all of humanity. Dr. Barapanakani, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I want to thank you also for the many times that we've talked. I look forward to hopefully meeting you very soon and leaving us with a positive message for the future for planet Earth. Thank you so much.